Hello, welcome to the podcast. So pleased to have you on. I've been looking forward to this. We've only met recently, but already the conversations have just been sparking. So very much looking forward to this episode. Would you like to introduce yourself? Let our audience know who you are, what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. I do my best. No, my name's Atif Choudhury, and I'm one of the founding directors and the CEO of a social enterprise called D&A, Diversity and Ability. And what we do is we provide assistive technology support, and we campaign for inclusion for neurodiverse learners and those who are impacted by long-term physical differences. Our campaign work is really about to make sure that more lived experiences are teaching the very technologies that we need to make sure is available to everybody.
So what type of people can get that support? Who are you reaching out to and helping?
Great. So, at the moment, currently, the people that access our services are mostly reaching us because of the Disabled Students Allowance and also through applying through grants for access to work. But it's a real challenge for us in England, in this country, throughout the entire United Kingdom, is that one of the challenges we've got is that, look, if you really need life-changing support and assistive technology to support you with neurodiversity, you've got to go to higher education or you've got to get into a full-time job. Whereas for me, that's not good enough, We need to make sure that we're supporting people getting to higher education. We need to be supporting people who are trying to get full-time work or work that they can choose. So some of those impacted by, say, dyslexia, for example, are not necessarily in those places. People that are even impacted by rough sleeping and homelessness that may never access a diagnosis, may never access it's a socio-economic discussion about how you even access a diagnosis to even know that you are neurodiverse, that you are impacted by it. So we provide support, and we're working with Crisis and Homeless Link and Samungos to sort of bring this challenge and make sure this technology and these approaches for widened participation are available for more people.
Amazing. And it's a frustration for me that you've got to put your hand up and go, I'm disabled, to get help, right? And then you may even need a piece of paper or somebody who's in a professional role, a doctor or a psychologist, or, they're the ones who can go, hey, yes, this person gets the label. Oh, actually, I don't want a label.
Yeah.
And all those people, they don't get the support then because they don't want this label. So, on that, how I often ask this question, what is neurodiversity? What does it mean to you? Like, how do you frame it? Why does it matter?
Fantastic. I think, look, for me, I think we're all neurodiverse, yeah, but we're just not all marginalized by it, and I think that's a controversial opinion, I know, but we're so born out of so many rich experiences that are never captured on a diagnosis. But in our journey to try and get one, in our struggle to say, look, I need to know how I feel. I need to know why I struggled as a kid. I need to know why I struggle even now. I need a piece of paper that makes me understand that. So, of course, it's important. And, of course, we need to make sure that people can access that diagnosis when they want to and need to. But in truth, there's something that comes with it that I think is rarely talked about, is the kind of trauma, the learning trauma, learning isolation, where you don't feel like you fit in. And so getting that piece of paper really helps. But then we've got to ask ourselves, does the diagnosis talk about the impact? Or does it tell you how you perform on a test, on a set of tests? And if it doesn't tell us about the impact, then we need to think about, what does that mean then? What do I mean about neurodiversity? Well, I can talk about autism, I can talk about ADHD, I can talk about dyslexia, but that doesn't mean that it makes sense to everybody else. Your version of dyslexia for you, Theo, may be different for me, right? Because we grew up differently. We had intersectional lives, brilliant lives, I hope, and great childhoods, but not always easy. And so those experiences shape us. So when I was a kid and I see Richard Branson talking about his dyslexia, I think, awesome, great, Richard Branson. But that says nothing for me. It says nothing about how I feel growing up.
Absolutely.
And I suppose that's it. Neurodiversity really is a balance of strengths and wonder and potential and human potential. But it's also not easy, because it's built around systemic, and I mean, I'll clarify that, but social challenges that have decided this is the way to learn, and this is what's a good, useful kid, and this is a useful adult, because they've got good literacy skills, or they got good working memory, or they've got good fine motor skills. So that's what we want. And if you don't fit into those three things, we're just going to baffle and shake our heads and not sure what to do other than problematize you. And I think that's not a way forward for the world we want to live in.
No. And before we get on to this in a sec, before we kind of get some of that wonderful information that exists in your head, the experiences and knowledge and expertise you have within this space that people are going to love to hear. How have you got to where you are today? What was your life like? Where did you grow up? What is your lived experience, and how does that relate to neurodiversity?
Great, thanks. I still think about this quite often, maybe more often than I should in some ways. But my childhood, we didn't talk about. I come from a culture and a community that I was very loved throughout my childhood and still so in my family. But we didn't talk about this stuff. And it wasn't just the family. It isn't just because you're coming from a brown culture where stigma and shame plays a role. But it's about class. And I think for anyone listening to this, I hope that resonates, It's about, are you in a social circle that even talks about neurodiversity? Are you in a social circle and a social economic bubble that even says there's people who are brilliant and they are neurodiverse? And look at them, they're historians, they're scientists, they're young girls who are shaking the world. You might not be from that bubble. You might not be from that culture. You might not be from that perspective. And so you learn to hide things, as I did. I hid as much as I could until I no longer could. In truth, I never really found out formally with the diagnosis till I was 28. But I knew at 13. In my heart, I knew. I thought, I am not as, and I really felt that I wasn't intelligent. I really strongly felt that. Despite everyone saying, wow, the way you talk about this is amazing, or the way you talk about it as a kid was amazing. But in those days, I used to think, well, unless I can't write it down, it's not real. Nothing's real until I can write it down. And that was always my struggle. So I guess growing up, neurodiversity for me meant a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't good. And mostly it affected my ability to make eye contact. It affected my ability to talk about things, to say stuff that I had an opinion on. I sometimes say, look, if I could have drunk a glass of water that would magically make, dyslexia go away and ADHD, I'd have downed it in a heartbeat, But if you ask me now, of course not. It's the best of me. You can't separate the wonders that I've been part of and got to meet and help co-create. Occasionally I'd want to sip, but not often. But usually occasionally I'd want to sip that glass of water, but I won't. Not in the way that I'd have drunk it so fast as a kid.
I get it completely. A couple of nights ago, when we were having a meltdown in the household, I wish we could have all drank that water that night. But those moments are not every moment in your life. And what you mentioned there, I think makes me wonder: is neurodiversity then a middle class problem and opportunity?
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. The kind of conversations I wish more of us had, right? Just there. It is a class discussion. It is. It doesn't mean that it only affects a class. Of course not. But it does mean that certain people can afford to get a diagnosis. Some people can't. Certain people can afford to say, look, we can advocate for our kids. And some people can't. And some people are familiar with saying, well, I can get extra tutors and I can pay for this, and others can't, And if you're in a certain school, and I mean this, I'll give an example. It's about impact. Somebody with I hope listeners can resonate to this, but you could have someone who's got a mild diagnosis and they're 21. Sorry, I'll give an example. You could have someone who's got a severe diagnosis, and they come up on a piece of paper and it says severe. But they might be 21 years old at drama school, and of course they've got a story, and of course it's been hard. but they've also had a mum who's been able to advocate and fight for them. That their mum's been so excited by their talents, they're going off to do drama. The mum might have even given up work part-time to become a special education needs teacher. That's not unusual, and that's a beautiful story. But that person has a severe diagnosis, and you can take someone who's got a mild diagnosis and say, well, that's not as important as Mr. Severe. But what if Mr. Mild was 57? What if Mr. Mild has got anger management because he's just never valued himself? What if Mr. Mild has avoided job promotion his whole life? Who does that? Who avoids job promotion? Or someone who's scared that people are going to see his writing? What if Mr. Mild's relationship with himself has affected his own family and his own partners? And now Mr. Mild is living in a rental market because he didn't dare take a mortgage out because he wasn't sure if he could handle it emotionally and mentally, and too much paperwork. Now, what I'm getting at is to think about impact. A person coming to terms with something, and Mr. Miles only found out because he's doing higher education at night time because he's really desperate not to be lost when he's a pensioner. There's a lot going on there, right? And so I think we don't live in a world that really thinks about impact enough. What we think about is, what's the label? And what does the label say? And the label doesn't tell us much. It really doesn't. It's the impact of neurodiversity. It's the impact of a learning difference that we're here to we should be talking about, because we're all individuals.
So the Mister that we're talking about there could also have children, right? And then how are they then dealing with their children who may also be neurodifferent, neurodiverse, however you want to describe them, or neurotypical, as Amanda puts it? If you're in a neurodiverse family, you're normal in that family, right?
Yes.
So,
But
they then may have cultural nuances, challenges, and all the other stuff. So you're right. At that person at 52, the challenges that they're facing may be so significant that we could be talking around risk to life, their own life, other people's lives, and if no support is being given because they're okay, they're fine, they're 50, they've got a house, they've got a job, what's it matter? We don't have to worry about them. I mean,
no, sadly, you're right. I mean, you can't really. I mean, look, there's no health agenda without a mental health agenda. Really, there isn't, right? So someone can say, well, are you talking about dyslexia or are you talking about mental health? So I'm saying that, in 2021, we're still having those kind of thoughts. I'm talking about inclusion. I'm talking about participation and what that does when it's not there. So people who are masking a lot may well be dealing with mental health needs, may well be dealing with depression. And even if I took someone, let's use someone with children, actually, that's a good example. When someone is going through performance indications, so again, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will feel this. You're going through job performance because your writing's not so good, the report writing is not so good, KPIs have been brought up, you're thinking maybe to join the trade union. Now, when you're in that process, then you're going to talk about neurodiversity and you're going to get screening at work. And then you're saying, glad I'm talking about, learning differences. I'm talking about ADHD, dyslexia, autism, etc. But actually, when that screening is happening, you're not just having a neurodiversity conversation. Really, you're not. You're having a job protection conversation. And you're worried for your kids. You're worried for yourself. Now, who on earth has ever had a stress around job protection that isn't now having a conversation about mental health and mental health needs? You can't separate it, right? And so I know that sounds a bit bleak, but it's understandable. And there's your impact. There's your impact of how does a person feel and how do we make sure that they're in a job that brings out emotionally the best in them and emotionally the best that learning differences can give us. But it's not easy stuff. It's not easy stuff when so many of us in the workplace and as children struggle to get a diagnosis and also struggle to feel comfortable with one because they are, as you said, Theo, problematized so much.
And so it's not just them, it's their family members, right? Because their family members might be going to work and dealing with the stress and the anxiety of what's going on. So that individual's in a workplace and maybe they're finding out they're dyslexic or ADHD or whatever, right? They're finding something out about themselves. That is making them worried at work. They're taking that home. That worry exists in the home. That impacts other people in the home. They go into their workplace. They're taking this shared worry. So we're not just talking about one person in an organization. We're talking about many people in many different organizations that are being impacted by decisions that are potentially being made in just one organization, right? So even if we fix some companies to deal with this in the right way, like we're still going to face a huge problem, because there's going to be many other companies that maybe don't care and they're not doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got to see more modelling, because ultimately we're actually talking. I know it's challenging. But here we're actually talking about shame. Do you know? I think we're talking about shame more than we're talking about neurodiversity, or we are talking about neurodiversity. But the issue of shame is there, right? And it has a knock-on effect. And so what we've got to see is, look, we need to be talking about modelling, but we also got to talk about stigma. We've got to say, look, so I'm conscious like this week has been about National Neurodiversity Celebration Week. We've also had yesterday Bring Your Whole Self to Work. So the timings of this is great. It's fantastic. It's a good point to start saying, well, your whole self to work may be neurodiversity. You've not talked about it before. And this is what a week to talk about it. What a week. And I can say, we should all do that. We should all do that. I think I like to think about Greta Thunberg and recognize that here's a young girl who didn't fit in school, had an eating disorder, and that's not really talked about enough, but it's true. Her mum writes about that. And she's bullied just by adults at school. And yet here is a young girl that's within 2 years changed the thinking on climate emergency for the whole northern hemisphere of the world. She shamed a US president who really deserved to be ashamed. But more importantly, I think she's done as much for Superpowers, as she calls it, her autism. She's done as much for autism awareness for young girls, nearly as much as she's done on that, as she's done on climate change. So what I'm getting at is, we need organizations to stop saying things like we like disruptors and we like all that, because really sometimes I think you do, but you really don't always, because you're not excited about it when it's in front of you. You're excited about wishing that you were ahead of it before it's famous. But really, you can look at the Greta Thunberg who's in your office, who might not be good at small talk, who might not be good at, but look at the wonder. The guy who's got fantastic imagination, he's creating podcasts for a living, changing thinking, but might not have always been the best at writing reports. Me, I was the same. I worked in a bank. I was terrible. I was hopeless. I won't even go as to how bad that could have been. But it was there for 6 years. I got a job at 16, needed to financially for everyone. And I didn't choose a job. I got a job. And so many of us from working class families, we get jobs. We don't choose jobs. Middle class people choose jobs. And some upper class people get given jobs. But we all got to learn to choose what we're good at. And that's not easy when you're poor. It's not easy when you're struggling. And it's not easy when you've got a learning difference that you dare not talk about.
Absolutely. So you touched on something there, and I guess it's around role models, and how I have a slight worry and a concern sometimes when I think about role models is that we put somebody up there, and once you put them up there, they may not be able to get themselves down, right? And they may not be able to hide from the media, if we look at Greta as an example, and kind of the hate that may come. Like, why is that any different to a role model within an organization or in an education setting? Or are they effectively a young child in a school putting themselves up there and going, I'm dyslexic and I'm proud, and all of a sudden they've got things being thrown at them? Like, I am concerned by that kind of idea of a role model. And again, do we just put ourselves in a position where only certain people can be privileged enough for a wide variety of reasons to be able to be that role model?
Dead right. And Fia, thank you for, these are brave conversations to have, absolutely, you're dead right. I mean, look, when we put, and I call it the sort of the cult of personalities, when we put, that we all want personalities and we need them because it makes us feel like connected to something. But then if that personality suddenly doesn't seem to be as perfect, or there's a strategy to knock them down, then the idea can die. And And the idea, if it's good, if it's wholesome, if it's kind, if it allows growth, then it should be bulletproof, you know. But it can't be because people aren't. But ideas can be, you know. So it's really then saying is, look, so what? How do we make this everyday belonging? How do we make this everyday, this everyday inclusion, or this everyday these everyday Jedis? You know, how do we do that? Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. We do it by talking about it, but we also talk about how hard it is to build that trust. I'm going to give an example. Like, I like to help organizations to think about these things about moving at the speed of trust, you know, that we move at speed. And someone says, well, what does that mean? You know, I said, great, let's talk about it. You know, what does it mean? I said, well, for me, I guess it's me because I say it. I said, it means like when I am inviting someone to participate, knowing and I anticipate that just because everybody else is talking about dyslexia, for example, the people talking about it aren't brown. They're not necessarily poor. They don't necessarily have the protection of the privilege. So this person's not going to come forward. And when I talk about it, or when somebody else that looks like them, that feels like them, that is as scared as them, talks about how hard it was from them, then suddenly you're moving fast, you know, because you are modeling change, you're modeling authenticity, but above all, you're sharing that this is tough, but you're also embracing cultural humility. What I mean by that is it's hard for certain people to come forward and say, this speaks to me too. As brown people, and I'm going to say this, I think that we have to do more. My mum used to say that to me, you have to do more. You know, she wasn't talking about me not being good at reading or writing. She was talking about out there, things are not easy for us as migrants. We have to do more, you know. And when you know that's 4 words, you have to do more. When you know that at 12, and I didn't have to ask her why I need to do more, you know. And so when you know that at 12, and it is part of racism, it's part of structural issues. We can touch on that in a minute. But you share less. You do anything you can to share less. And when you've got a hidden difference, then you share less. You know? So, and if your work colleagues are joining the party on ADHD and dyslexia and stuff, great, fantastic. But if they don't necessarily look like you might not come forward. If people talk about autism a lot, and mostly when they're talking about a workplace, it actually looks like middle-class white boys and men talking about tech, then what does that say? What does that say about the participation for autistic girls, or brown girls, or poor white boys who aren't getting statemented? They're not getting access. So we've got to change that, really. We've got to really understand, look, what does that trust look like? And in other cases, that trust can't move fast at all because really the optics aren't there. The people who are talking about it are coming from protected places. Yeah. So when we say bring ourselves to work, of course we should do that. But what does it mean? You know, and who really gets to do it? I jokingly, and I'm going to say it because you've got the T-shirt on, if I may. But I said yesterday, he said, look, if I really brought myself to work every day, then I think I'd be sitting here, you know, in a Kevlar suit, a bulletproof Kevlar suit, dressed as Batman. You know, because no fear, that's the job I want.
Yeah.
It's the job I got, but it's the job I want. You know, and I'm kidding, but I'm saying is no one really brings themselves to work, but we can bring ourselves to a space that makes us feel kind and needed and wanted as individuals, and not so problematized. You know, and it's up for everybody to sort of ask the question, what does it take to do that? But I will say this, and you know, that it has to be an invitation and not an imposition. And I wonder if enough organizations out there are thinking about it as an invitation and recognizing when it looks like an imposition.
So, I find this a really fascinating thing, the kind of the bring your whole self to work piece. But then if I think about that in the context of neurodiversity, and something we've talked about before, is kind of that kind of who gets to participate. And I think that can impact on, as you describe it, the speed of trust. So if you're not allowed to participate, then there's going to be no speed of trust there, right? You're not, if you're not allowed in the 4 walls to have the conversation, then why are you going to trust anyone? So do we then potentially do ourselves a disservice? And by ourselves, I mean those who maybe have an interest in neurodiversity, around blocking people out. And that may be blocking people, it may be blocking brown people out, it may be blocking people from certain cultures, religious groups, whatever it may be. But because we have this very passionate view, and it may be as simple as autism, we are an autism group. We are all about autism. We are actually autistic. If you're not going to come in and put your hand up for that specific group, then you ain't coming in. Or then that could be the same for dyslexia or ADHD, or, I'm shouting about stuff in a very animated way. And it may be very introverted people who don't like my animated version of neurodiversity, right? That's okay, but it does create then these divides, and then it becomes quite tribal. And is that good, bad? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Again, what a courageous question, right? I mean, we're walking a minefield now, or tiptoeing around them anyway. Diversity doesn't have a destination. It doesn't. It doesn't. It should be. It's about a journey that we're all sharing. The question is, are we welcome to the journey? Is it a welcoming journey? And that's really important, because we don't get to. We've got some unlearning to do. We've got a bit of unlearning to do to shake off trauma, childhood trauma, to shake off exclusion, to shake off a medicalized way of looking at people. Now, when we start looking at diagnosis and the club that says, this is for autism, this is for this is for that, it's not great. It's not great. And I'll say why. And maybe that's controversial for others, but I'll say why. It's because a number of things. One is, it doesn't appreciate how hard it is for some people to get a diagnosis, as we've touched on. It doesn't appreciate the shame or stigma that some people carry. And then it sort of reinforces this idea, oh, you're neurotypical and we're this group, And if you go down that road, my worry is, look, when we say someone's neurotypical, that doesn't make any sense to me, because it says nothing about their childhood, it says nothing about the trauma, doesn't say nothing about whether they felt loved or not loved. It says nothing about social economics or what they could participate in. It says nothing about anything, really. It just says they haven't got a diagnosis for something. That's all. And that in itself isn't a clever way of looking at people's participation needs. The other side of it is, if we say this is our club, that is understandable. I truly understand it, because I've felt that way myself in the challenge of trying to heal from learning isolation, from exclusion, and healing from it. I've needed to say, this is my special thing. But then I sort of recognize, if I keep doing that, or any of us keep saying, we're reinforcing a medical model. We're reinforcing that this piece of paper says everything about us, which it doesn't. And then you take something that I think is really rarely talked about, but we have a very Eurocentric way of looking at neurodiversity all over the world. In fact, we've imposed it upon the whole world. We have an idea that, essentially a small percentage of people living in Europe and America, which isn't a lot compared to the percentage of the world, I think it's about 19%. You compare it to the population around the world, and we said, this is the framework in which we measure it. We're going to not question the class aspects of that framework. We're not really going to talk about the impact that it doesn't measure. We're just going to say, this is the framework, and we're going to impose that on the rest of the world. And then we're going to say, oh yeah, we're not very good at diagnosing black people. We're not really good at diagnosing black girls. We're not good at diagnosing girls at all. Hang on, what is this? So what are we doing here? Where's the vulnerability? Where's the leadership? Where's the cultural humility that says, yeah, this might not work well? The reason we don't do that conversation much is because it's just really healing for a lot of people to get a diagnosis. And it means a lot. And of course it does. And why should it not? But it's just to say, look, isn't there time for 2.0? The way we look at neurodiversity 2.0, that really is about intersectionality. It appreciates social economics. It appreciates skin color. It appreciates shame and stigma. And it shows all that in where it helps people participate. There are problems because the impact can be problematized, but it doesn't mean the person has to be all the time. You know?
And it lowers the bar significantly because, you've got to wait 3 to 5 years at the moment for kind of an ADHD diagnosis, as an example. Like, that's 3 to 5 years you put your life on hold in a way, or your child's life on hold. Unless you just think, I don't actually need the diagnosis. I'm just going to go and do what I need to do to help myself and to be the best person I can be. But a lot of people, they don't. You're right. This thing, the way that we've designed this model is that, no, I need the diagnosis. I can't get involved in this club and have a conversation because I don't have it. I can't go and ask for help because I don't have it, because it's the model is you need to be disabled, right, to tick the box to get the help and support, or at least that's the perception, and that's the perception of the HR team, and that's the perception of the clinician or whatever. It's crazy, and it drives me insane, because rather than just go, how can we help this person, right? What can we do to give them a better life? We go, how many hurdles can we put in front of them when they're already in dire need of help and support?
Yeah. I compared my own. I guess getting that piece of paper was incredible for me. Incredible, because it made me feel like, okay, so I'm not. It says here that my verbal reasoning is in the top 2% of the country. Wow, I thought I was the bottom 2% of the country at everything. What's this about? And then I realized, okay, yeah. So I learned to talk in a way so well that you would never ask me to write it. Of course, I trained my brain to do that. I trained my mind to do that. That's a good thing, but it shouldn't be so hard. It shouldn't come with such emotional labor, and it does. We've got such a wrong way of looking at children's participation and their needs. As I said, I go back to those 3 things. Here's a game, and to play this game, you've got to have working memory skills, you've got to have literacy skills, and you've got to have fine motor skills. And if you've got those 3 things, then you're part of the game. And if you haven't got those 3 things, what are we going to do? Whereas that's not how the game can always be played. And we know from the wonders of the world, we know from Thomas Edison's light bulb to Henry Ford's car to Greta Thunberg to Albert Einstein to Tom Smith, who's just being born tomorrow. That this is the game is not very imaginative, and it has a consequence when we don't do that. The world is built through lived experiences of people, but it's also built from the innovation of neurodiverse people. It's never stopped. But we just have got a narrative that says, do you know what? This amazing invention was done despite dyslexia. Or do you know what? This was an amazing thing that we can't believe that, she did this despite autism. We are going to get to a space, and we deserve to get to a space where we say, do you know what? It was amazing that it was done with autism. It was done with dyslexia. It was done with ADHD. It was with, we can't keep using a deficit model and then keep saying, why are people not feeling included? It doesn't make sense to me.
So I think to kind of neatly bring everything together, Atif, what if we look at bringing your whole self to work, right? Is it even possible? Do we have so much inequality in so many variety of different ways, whether it's class, whether it's race, whether it's gender? I mean, we could just go on so many different variations and variety of stigma, of feeling less than, of not being respected by people. Like in the commercial world that we live in, is it even possible to imagine in years, if not in centuries, that you can bring your whole self to work in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, look, it's about taking stock of and appreciating that we're born into things, right? All of us, There's not a person listening to this right now that isn't realizing they're just born somewhere. And with that, where we're born, we decide that's what the world is. It can't be anything else because that's where I'm born, and it's what I see, it's what I look like, it's who I meet. And we're not living in the world. We live in worlds. They're overlapping worlds. They have different values and different social economics, poverty or middle class. And with it, different colours and different access discussions and different opportunities. So when you can take stock of that, then you've got to then start saying, what can I unlearn? What can I shake off that hasn't really served me to understand people around me and what they need? And me not understanding that and the risk they take, the emotional labour they're giving, and me not understanding that has a consequence. Yeah, because people, some of us, particularly men, we're born with too much power, far too much power. So sometimes we just don't hear what we need to feel. And I said again, we need to feel this, not just hear it or find complicated ways of getting around it. We've got to even sit in pain if we have to recognise it. You touch on race, so I'm going to just sort of perhaps give that back, because neurodiversity, I want to see. I feel like I don't want to be an ambassador for brown people talking about dyslexia or ADHD. I don't want to be, but I can't help but notice that I have become that. And I'm not rejecting it either. I think, okay, great, well, let's so be it. But I want the truth to that, to say, look, this comes at the cost of emotional labour. It comes at the cost of sacrifice. And I'm totally good with that, by the way. I just don't want anyone to feel sad about it. But I had to go and create a company, the company I needed when I was younger. And I never would have talked like this, never in any other company I've ever worked for in my life, until the one that gave me a sense of home. But I had to go and make that company. So that's something to think about. The other thing is, for brown people, and I say this, look, I'll give an example, and maybe this will land or not for listeners. When I think about Colin Kaepernick taking the knee, and it's famous, he loses equity. A famous black man said, look, I just can't believe they're shooting kids here, and it's not right, and it needs to stop. And for that, he lost his job. He loses equity. Rosa Parks, when she stood at the back of a bus, when she refused to stand at the back of a bus, we celebrate her because she was a credit to the whole of America and the breaking of segregation in America. But she lost her job. She lost equity. She lost participation, equality for a while. Muhammad Ali, we all love him. Who doesn't love Muhammad Ali? I said, but when he went to prison, where was the love then? When his family got stripped, when he got stripped of his belt and his family went hungry, where was that love then? He risked equity, he risked equality. So when famous black people speak out, they lose participation, they lose money, they lose. So if that happens, then how would non-famous black people speak out? Do you know how? And so you've got to stop for a moment and go, right, if a brown kid with dyslexia is saying, listen, I belong somewhere, even if the teachers aren't feeling it and they're not seeing my wonder, I still belong. We've got to take a deep breath to anticipate that that's happening all around us. And then ask ourselves, what does our anticipation look like? How welcoming is it to the very people and the very children that aren't playing this game the way others do? And what do we miss? And I'll really stress that. What are we missing when we're not looking for that brilliance? I look at myself and think, I've been part of 2 social enterprises that have changed the world, one in Palestine and one in the UK. I love it. I can't take, I love it. But I found my voice. I truly did. But I think I was 42 before that I could actually realise, you found your voice, son. Sorry, I shouldn't say so. I found my voice, And what if I didn't? We've supported over 26,000 people in the UK, villages across Palestine, who taught families and farmers who taught me what great looks like instead of good enough. People in this country facing rough sleeping, showing us what great looks like instead of good enough, because they can't access this technology and yet we're giving it away. So I guess really what I'm saying is, if we all find our voices, we can all make this a lot more easier for people who don't know how to find theirs. But it's just not easy. It's brave work. But we've got to say, actually, what does neurodiversity mean to me? Never mind what it says on a piece of paper, never mind what it says to loads of people coming from a different class background to me. What does it mean to me?
Brilliant. And I think the biggest thing I can take from that, is very powerful, is that we face many inequalities that we need to face up to. And I think until we do that, whatever it may be, neurodiversity, any of the D&I subjects or whatever, until we look hard at ourselves in the mirror and realize we got to do more, then I think it's going to take much longer to get the real change, the significant change that we need for everybody and not just for the few. I think it's just really powerful stuff. And I started this podcast and wrote the book with Amanda for exactly the same. Well, it's not exactly the same because we're individuals, right? But I couldn't find the information that I wanted and needed when I needed it around neurodiversity, just like you couldn't find the support when you were younger. So you created that support for others, which is incredible. And that's kind of what I've done in my own way. And so that really resonates with me. And I just say continue to do the brilliant work, and we will continue to have other wonderful conversations, I'm sure. I could talk to you all day long, and I'm sure everybody else would like to continue to listen to the wonderful thoughts you have around neurodiversity and way beyond that. So where can they come and find you? How can they engage, connect with you, and learn more about what you do?
Oh, yeah, that's as easy as I would say. It's, we've got a website, which I think, I guess you're going to put it on here anyway, but it's just Google diversity and ability and you'll find us online. But there's a telephone number as well. Not everyone wants to write emails. I don't. I like to speak to people. There's a free phone number. Call it. And if you feel like, you found this conversation really enriching, I'd like to know, I'd like to know if you felt like, no way, I'm not, way, he's messing with my tribe. I'm not having that.
We want the debate, right? We want the debate. Bring it on.
Then get in touch. It's there. It's all good. It's as safe as we can hope it to be, but we need to keep making sure that more people facing powerlessness are participating in the world that we want to build. And it's good for us all. We're only richer as people, as a community, as human beings, when we see that participation feeling so welcomed.
Yeah, and we have, our own privileges that will allow us to do that in our own spaces, communities. So I think it reminds me again, to wake up every day with kind of that energy and vigor to do more with that position that I have. So thank you so much. And I'll pop the phone number on the podcast in the section as well, so people can get it there as well as the link. Thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
No, thank you, Theo, for having me, and really to all of you listening, thank you for making the time to hear some words.